But we are really excited about our next speaker. I think this is a topic that we're all very interested in exploring further. And it's one that we've talked briefly about, is around this whole notion of being able to create experience. And so I'd like to introduce to you Rachel Permuth, who is the National Research Director of Business and Industry for Sodexo in North America. So prior to working to Sodexo, she spent 10 years as a behavioral scientist at the National Institute of Health. So Rachel's work revolves around understanding and measuring quality of life drivers in the workplace, both from the person and the built environment perspective. She received her PhD in public health from the University of Maryland with a concentration on workplace health behavior. Now, I know that Rachel also loves to travel to new places, and since studying and creating experiences, they've tainted her a bit to where it's really hard to find a quintessential experience when you know that you're empowered to create them herself. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you so much. Well, so at its very core, this is a presentation about measurement and metrics. Because at Sodexo, many of our clients, well, I'll say actually 5 to 10% of our Fortune 500 clients say, please help us create a great workplace experience for our employees. But then when we ask them, what do you mean by a great workplace experience? They're very hard pressed to be able to tell us what that means. So because of that, we really decided to delve into a research effort into exploring what workplace experience means. There's been really no research or rigor around this topic. And as we know, the notion of experience has really been examined in tourism, and we've heard of the patient experience. But if you think of experience, we often think of some of these things. So when you guys think of great experiences, this is the interactive part, and you can shout, what do you think of? What words describe great experiences to you? Fun. Exciting. Intuitive. Okay. Inspiring. Memorable. Very good. You know, and our previous speaker talked about the experience economy, and this is the framework on which we've kind of delved into workplace experience. So Pine and Gilmore, they're two Harvard researchers, had a 4E framework for experiences. So 4 E's of experience are education, aesthetics, entertainment, and escapism. So just keep those in mind: education, entertainment, escapism, and I forgot one now as I go in. Thank you. All right. So we know these are out, and you can think of American Doll and Starbucks and Disney, but what does it really mean? We also know that experiences are a bit different than other things we create. There's an emotional attachment to an experience. So it's not only rational, but it's emotional as well. And if you think of, I often think of this iceberg, and we see it sometimes with exploring the conscious and subconscious. A lot of our attachments are a very deep level. So we don't even realize they're happening, and they're at a deep emotional level. And again, here's the Pine and Gilmore model. So we had to dig deep and do a lot of different kinds of research studies as to what a great experience at work would look like. So how many of you are familiar with Cornet or attend Cornet? Okay, good. So that was one of our first entrees into trying to do some work into workplace experience. We put out a big survey, and we got over 500 responses. We were very pleased because it was a very popular topic. One thing we found out is that people thought it was important to measure that. And that's nice, but that doesn't tell me much. But then when we asked people if they could define it, 2/3 said that they could. But here's the confusing part. So we said, okay, could you define it? Give us some adjectives that could define it. And we got 1,200 adjectives. When they wrote their adjectives down, and we had an open text field. Here are the most important attributes of a great workplace experience. And these are key, right? Because these are not tactics, these are not things. Oftentimes when we researchers go into a new environment and do needs assessments, people talk about tactics and amenities and things. But we really need to think about attributes and elements of giving people control when we go into the workplaces. So when we design solutions, it's really important to keep in mind these attributes. Also, when we measure, there's a fundamental question. If workplace experience on the left are those adjectives, why are we measuring in terms of satisfaction? They're very different constructs, right? So if experience is one thing, why are we talking about satisfaction? Okay? We're getting at very two different things. Satisfaction doesn't necessarily have that emotional tie to it. So we had to do some more research, and we decided to create an index. One of the things we are pressed to do a lot of times with our clients, obviously, is show ROI, or business value. And I just want to say, when we are having to demonstrate ROI, as you all know, it's extremely difficult. Oftentimes, it takes several years to show how any initiative manifests into business value. And so I'm going to show you that path that we've taken. On our way to developing an index, and an index, all of you know, is like a questionnaire in essence. It's a questionnaire with several different elements in it, so you can pinpoint different areas of improvement. So you can correlate the areas you need to other business outcomes. Sodexo is a quality of life company at heart. A lot of people think of us as a food company. People have joked, you do food, what else do you do? Food and facilities at our core. And we talk about the wave of the future of work as being hospitality-oriented and service-oriented. In order to do that, your people in the front of the house, your operators, have to be trained in a different way. They have to be trained as if they're at the Ritz. It's something that the millennials are looking for. These millennials that we're talking about, many of them work for me in our research shop, and it's taken me a long time to even understand them. They have very different expectations, a different work ethic, and their expectations are higher. So whoever is front-facing to your employee or to your client has to be trained in a new way. Just briefly, this was a case study at Sodexo, and this correlates with hospital revenue. We wanted to tie experience to revenue through recommendations. It's a little bit of a complicated study, but we measured 100 patients in one corridor of a hospital with the same disease patterns to another hospital in the same sector with the same service providers. And the people who are most pleased, if you look on the far side, with service, rated the hospital much higher and had higher revenue and quicker turnaround time than the comparison hospital. So what I mean by that is people who are most satisfied with their experience better outcomes in the end. Other better outcomes were disease recovery time. Experience is very important, so this led us to think even more about how to measure it in the workplace. How many of you do research as part of your job? Oh, many. Okay. I think part of the hard part from coming from an academic entity like a university or Sodexo or like an academic entity like a university or National Institutes of Health to Sodexo was that this process takes so long and that they didn't understand that time to market took a long time. So to really get into workplace experience, the explore phase took a long time. When we went into the field to really understand what workplace experience meant, and when we explored that in first, we wanted to just understand an office environment. We realized that the nature of work is changing and it's much more virtual, but this was the sample that we really had access to at first. We had to go through legal review. We did a lot of work understanding the literature on workplace experience. We had to recruit, do interviews, and develop a framework. What we came to understand was workplace experience was not employee engagement. It wasn't job satisfaction. It wasn't just experience. It wasn't work-related quality of life or well-being, but here's what it was. All right, I'm going to spend some time here because I think this will help with developing solutions. Here's our model. And this informed our index. The index I'm not going to show today, but I would show it in subsequent, I think, talks. Workplace experience is really a composite of two things: experiential factors, like we talked about in Pine and Gilmore, and work-related quality of life factors. The two that are very important in work-related quality of life are escapism and aesthetics, primarily escapism. So when I talk about escapism, I don't necessarily mean escaping from work, but I kind of do. So the notion of breaks or getting out of one's space or one's head or away from one's boss is critical to experience. So whatever solutions or ideas or programs we implement, escapism is key, and so is aesthetics. I would say that particularly for millennials, aesthetics is the first make or break decision in recruitment. And we see this a lot in colleges and universities, and that's a lot of what we advise and consult upon there. So it's not as if entertainment and education, what we talked about before, are not important. It's just they don't apply as much in a work setting. When, again, if we talk about escapism, you can break it down. So number of breaks, control over breaks, ability to go where you need to, when you want to, spaces for breaks, etc. And then aesthetics, we get into ability to see daylight, ability to see things that remind you of nature or natural elements, and then color patterns, okay? So that's experiential. Then you get into work-related quality of life, and this is where the real measurement begins and the real impact on health and all of those things that really drive ROI. Work-related quality of life factors are generally bucketed into career, physical environment, socialization, and work-life balance. And the ones that are in bold red are highlighted as such because we in this room can influence most of them. The one career is generally under the purview of HR. Those are things like wages and time schedules, etc. But when you get into changing the physical environment, changing the ability to socialize, and getting work-life balance elements, you start getting into the cost drivers that affect health, and then things that help HR to save costs. All right, again, then we get into the moderation of all of this. So getting one's connection to the emotional assessment to their work environment is not easy. That's moderated by a lot of different factors, and it's very hard to control. So I would argue if you're measuring this, you have to get into context people's emotional state. If you go all the way to the left, service delivery, the most impactful way to facilitate or orchestrate a workplace experience is by a service delivery model, in our opinion. So who are your providers? Who are your front-facing people that can really help, create a better environment through their behaviors that model the behaviors that are wanted by the organization that you're serving? Okay, And it's complex, but we think that's a driving force in shaping it. So again, all of these factors form an index that we use to measure experience. If you think of top contributors to workplace quality life, which was in our slide before, the middle ones are what we can influence most in the room. And again, they're most measurable, and they have economic implications. So please do just consider this as things you can measure that have economic conversions and things you can tie to ROI. The things in darker blue are more HR functions. When we talk about the most important things tied to physical space and things that have economic potential impact, commute time is huge because that's a correlate to stress. Ability to focus, air quality, safety, privacy. And when you get into air quality and safety, huge studies, of course, on the impact of those environmentally on the economics of disease and disease burden in the workplace. As we go on, we have to test our index and our instrument with different populations. And so we're doing this now. We're doing this work with frontline workers. We're testing it with virtual populations. We'll be testing it soon in manufacturing environments as that environment becomes, it's a difficult environment to test out in experience, but we will be doing that, testing it out in the financial sector. And then we're going to have to model it and predict it. So does this workplace experience index, does this score, or does a subscore of it, does it predict absenteeism, turnover? So that work is coming. It takes a very long time. But there is a way to show that experiences can work and can predict other outcomes. And here's an application, so just to show it in a stepwise. So let's say you have a bad experience score, and let's say you have a bad subscore, a low subscore of people don't socialize, and you take it down. Well, there's no areas to socialize, or there's no means to socialize. Then, as a result, you have poor social well-being, which we know is a poor driver of health and has economic implications. You have lower job involvement and increased stress. We know that has economic implications, and then we develop solutions accordingly. So it all becomes very nice for an ROI model. And then we have questions. It's a lot to throw in this amount of time, but I welcome questions, and I'm happy to talk about more other measurement issues as well.
In that last slide, you showed $7,500 per employee related to stress. Could you expand on that information?
Sure. So that cost probably came in an aggregate from stress due to doctor's visits, absenteeism, days out of work, due to headaches, backaches. You know, it depends how things are coded, mental illness, stuff like that. So they take a disease and they parse it out as related to stress or not.
Kate Lister, have you done any work on the correlation between the workplace experience and job satisfaction and engagement?
That is next. Did everybody hear that? Correlations between experience, job satisfaction, and engagement. So correlational work is the first type of work that you do with an index. And that will come out later this year.
Peter Miskowicz, JLL. In terms of ownership of this application model, is it owned at the executive level, at the senior HR levels, at senior workplace leadership levels? Who's owning this in your perspective?
Yeah, that's a really good that's a good question. So typically, when we work with companies like this, we ask for a group of CRE, FM, communications, marketing, HR, and I'm missing some, and IT, and finance if we can get it. And that's kind of one of our, we have to have it as a steering committee. And we have a case study that I couldn't share that had that as a model, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
I've got one for you.
Okay.
But what recommendation would you give this audience around being able to truly think about creating, and we've got a steering committee that could begin to function about it, but how do you go about really building the kind of experience that is authentic for that organization? So it doesn't feel forced. We've all gone through that experience, but something that really feels like it takes them to that next level.
Yeah, so so I would say first, keep in mind the model. Use a model and go from a model. So what are experiences? Use the model, but then taking into context the culture. When you have a culture that's very different from what the people are like, so for example, quickly, we had an insurance agency. The people were new, millennials, but the culture was top-down, command control. They weren't ready to meet each other. So you have to have a very slow change management process going on to develop the experiences slowly and have them modeled to get where you want to be. I guess my answer is carefully. Do it carefully, keeping in mind people and culture, and going where you want to be.
Others? Okay, I've got another question then. I'm just curious around what role then does national culture play in terms of creating experience?
It's huge. We're in 80 countries, and I'm always reminded, because we're a French-owned company, and they say, Rachel, we're not, this may not work in France, and I'm like, I'm aware, that. So it plays a huge role. I always have to keep in mind language, how long it takes to explain things, how behaviors are individual or collective, where goals are more individual or collective, what space is like. So yes, that takes a role. It all does. Mm-hmm. And that's where it becomes complicated. Every process is different.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead.
Clay.
In some cases, people may be in high-walled cubes. They like it that way because they have plants and tchotchkes and all that sort of stuff. So if you measure their current workplace experience, they may be really happy. You want to take them somewhere else. So how do you use measurement of workplace experience to illustrate for them how good work life could be?
You said something really powerful. I actually might not want to take them somewhere else. I've visited places where statisticians and actuaries are very, very happy, and you build communal spaces and they don't use them. So one thing I could do is ask their bosses to model using the spaces, encourage them, but if they don't want to, they may not have to because they do their best work there. So we have to be very careful. I think architects have told me this many times. You have to be very careful when the leadership says, build these communal spaces. It may not be the answer.
Leadership has very good reasons for wanting the behavior to change, but as Clay said, people are very happy not only with their behavior right now, but their experience. But leaders want it to change. Then how could we use this model to help support leaders in their desire to change behavior?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. So as the speaker before me said, I don't know if I'm going to get it, look at human need states. So look at the human needs first, and then look at different behaviors that might be associated with those needs. So a main human need is to socialize or affiliate. And then that's a collective need, but then you have to look at individuals within that group. So it's complex, so I can't give you, but so I would say look at group behavior, macro, then go micro. There's so many different segments.